Candlestick Park in San Francisco. In the same month, they released a new album, which showed that they too were moving in a radically new direction.
I don't know where you were when the first time you ever heard Tomorrow Never Knows. Somebody pulled us in off the street in 1967 in the Haight, or was it 66, I think. Pulled us right off the street into a record store, said, "You've got to listen to this. You've got to listen to this." And it was Tomorrow Never Knows. So we felt very strongly at that time that the Beatles were on the same wavelength as we were. And in fact, everybody in San Francisco was, around the world, too.
After years on the road, the Beatles had grown tired of screaming fans and now wanted to explore the possibilities of the studio. They too had been taking LSD and were getting interested in Eastern religion.
John came with this idea, this song, which was almost a chant, and he actually said that he wanted his voice to sound like the Dalai Lama on a mountaintop. And it was a very insistent drum beat by Ringo, which was quite interesting. And Paul had been experimenting with tape recorders, and he would bring me these weird loops made from guitars or just singing noises or all sorts of things. And by having them on different machines, you have a loop on a machine, and then we fed that through the console, so that by raising any one of the faders at any one time, like an organ stop, the sound would come up. So the console in the studio became a playing desk.
We have a special mouse, you'd see, and goes like this. And the guitar turns into a piano or something, And then you may say, why don't you use a piano? Because the piano sounds like a guitar.
Music from all over the world was thrown into the psychedelic melting pot. George Harrison learned sitar from a master of the instrument who was fast becoming the guru of raga rock.
I first heard Ravi Shankar back in 1964 when Jim Dixon played some of the stuff that they'd been recording over at World Pacific, where he worked. And Ravi was one of their artists, and we loved it. I'd never heard anything like Indian music before. And Crosby and I got into it on the 12 strings. We started playing... trying to emulate the sound of the sitar on the 12 string.
I'm glad that I was almost 47, going 50. Otherwise, I might have lost my head like most of them do, with that adulation. It was just being treated like a rock star.
I'm sure you must have been asked this lots of times before, but what's your opinion of sort of English pop groups and American pop groups using sitar and the Indian influence in their records?
Well, I'm afraid that this sudden interest that there seems to be now might go away.
What made me very angry, that they all said that in India everyone takes drugs. Unless you take drugs, you cannot meditate, you cannot play music, you cannot have sex. And strange, which is completely wrong,
There's something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear.
1967 opened on a high note as 20,000 hippies crowded into Golden Gate Park for a taste of things to come. The human be-in.
I think it's time we stop. Children, what's that sound?
We had a beautiful day, January 14th, 1967, in the rainy season in San Francisco, when the be-in occurred. In the first thing in the morning, Allen Ginsberg and Gary Snyder and Lenore Kandel and other poets circumambulated the field in order to purify it using Tibetan mantras and chants. And as the day went on, the stage was set up, the bands came with their equipment, and people started to come in.
The be-in we call the gathering of the tribes. When you walked into that park that day, man, it was so full of pot smoke, you could barely see, but it was totally crowded with people and camped out all, it looked like a Chippewa village.
The human being was a very interesting experience for me. I remember we got the word that was going to happen in Berkeley, and then in the morning taking some LSD and going over to be in the audience and just experience it. And when I was coming onto the LSD and sitting there, and I remember seeing everybody up on stage and thinking, this is really great. This is like these are all the princes and princesses of the new tribe, and we're the tribes.
I would say this to all the members of the establishment: we are happy and proud to have you in our brave new world.
We realized at the time that we were communicating something to America. We were communicating that thousands of American youths could gather together in peace and love, and that we were a force in the American political and social framework.
The human being made the Haight-Ashbury scene national news, and before long, San Francisco was being called the Liverpool of America.
I took the president of Columbia Records to the Haight with his chief honchos. We were out here for the party presenting the debut of the Moby Grape album, and they walked him down Haight Street, and all he could see was dollar signs. And he was, wow, what's hey? And I'd say, look, this is really happening. You have to understand what's going on here. This is your son. This is your daughter. And he said, sign anybody you want. Sign anybody you want. He'd say, get these people, tell them. You can sign anybody you want. It was great, because he just saw the cash registers going off right away.
Warner Brothers sent their A&R man up to San Francisco to get the Grateful Dead out of the park and into the studio.
We were nervous about them, so we thought maybe the best way to deal with the record company was to dose them. Then they'd know what we were all about, and they'd be our friends, and then we could trust them once they were high. So it became our objective to get Joe Smith and Warner Brothers people to San Francisco as many times as we could during these complex negotiations. And we'd hand them drinks which they would not drink.
The record companies were regarded in San Francisco at that time as kind of robber barons who would just come in and plunder whatever they could and put it out, probably not support it too much, and just let it hang there and see what would happen. And eventually, the other bands were signing, and so I personally felt that we made our first record too soon, that we really weren't ready to record.
We went to a jazz label. It was called Mainstream. It's actually a jazz phrase meaning the conventional mainstream of music. And they when their needles would go in the red on the VU meters, they would panic. And that's kind of where we wanted them to be in the red all the time, and they didn't want them to be in the red, so we were like pulling back and forth.